There is a specific kind of silence that comes after you've won. We knew that silence. We'd earned it across 14 systems, 3 contested moons, and one particularly ugly campaign in the Delhari Expanse that nobody in the High Command talks about anymore, not because it was a defeat, but because it wasn't clean enough to be proud of. We'd learned to recognize that silence the way old soldiers recognize weather, by the way it sits in the chest, by the particular weight of it. We were in it. The silence. We were inside it. The Vanguard's last known position had been a smoldering scar on the 4th continent of Relsarith. Their supply chains, severed. Their communications, black. Their numbers, according to every intelligence asset we had embedded in the region, were incompatible with continued resistance. Incompatible. That's the word Sub-Commander Veth used in her briefing. I wrote it down 0447 station hours, cycle 9, green ink because I'd run out of white, and I remember thinking, what a clean word for what we did to them. What we did not account for, what none of US accounted for, not Veth, not the Admiral, not the 37 intelligence officers whose combined salaries could fund a small orbital station, was that incompatible with continued resistance is a math problem. And, humans, as I was about to spend the next 96 hours learning in exquisite, humiliating detail, are not doing math. They are doing something else entirely. I still don't have a word for it. I'm not sure we have one. What follows is my operational log, filed under protest, annotated where I have since learned I was wrong, which is most of it, and submitted to the High Command Review Board as Exhibit 7 in the ongoing inquiry titled, Why Are They Still Here? The silence held through breakfast. I noted this because I note everything. It is the habit that has kept me employed, which is to say alive, for 11 years under 3 different commands, and if that sounds like the same thing, it is because under this particular command it is exactly the same thing. I have a log entry for every meal I've eaten since Cycle 1. I have a log entry for the 17 minutes on Cycle 4 when the water recycler on Deck 9 made a sound like a dying hymn and, then, stopped making any sound at all. I have, somewhere in my secondary archive, a note about the specific texture of the ration paste they served us the morning we took the Vanguard's main base. It tasted like mineral chalk and, small victory. Veth stood at the forward viewport with her arms clasped behind her back, the posture she uses when she wants to look decisive and, is merely waiting to see what happens next. I have noted this about her before. I have noted it 17 times. She is an excellent officer and a deeply average strategist, and she has survived this long because the two qualities, in her particular combination, have never yet met a situation that required both simultaneously. Until now. Ref. She didn't turn. Your assessment. I was eating. I noted this 0449 hours, ration brick 7, the one with the kelp derivative that tastes like the memory of something better, and, then, I set it down and pulled up my board. Northern sector has gone cold, I said. Last thermal signature from Vanguard units in the valley was I checked 6 hours ago. Stationary. We assessed rest or extraction attempt. And nothing. The signature dispersed. Either they moved to a null zone or they're dead. Veth said it like she was closing a door. I did not write down what I thought about that. There are things you don't put in logs, and one of them is, I don't believe you. Another one is the name of the soldier who walked out of the northern firebase 2 hours before the signature vanished, carrying something heavy in a standard issue carry bag, moving in a direction that our grid coverage did not quite reach. I had noted the soldier. I had not yet assessed what I saw, because assessing it required a conclusion I was not prepared to reach on an empty stomach and 6 hours of sleep. The soldier had been limping. The soldier had been limping and whistling something, a sound our acoustic systems flagged as non-threatening vocalization, possible morale function, and the soldier had not looked like someone who was retreating. The soldier had looked like someone who was running an errand. 0831 hours. The silence broke. Not dramatically. Not with fire or broadcast or any of the things that would have made it easy to process. It broke because analyst Jorvan, who is 22 years old and has the general aspect of a creature that has never been warm enough, walked into the situation room with the specific gait of someone who has found a thing and does not want to be the one to say what it is. Ref. She set a data pad in front of me. Northern Valley, grid 779er. I looked. The thermal scan covered a 9 square kilometer section of collapsed industrial zone, former processing plant, the kind humans built before the war made building things impractical, all broken framework and buried tunnels, and the kind of structural complexity that made grid coverage a wish rather than a fact. There were 73 heat signatures. 73. Not stationary. Moving. Organized. 3 clusters, each one holding a formation I recognized from the Vanguard's documented tactical doctrine, a defensive diamond with rotating perimeter, the kind of thing that takes rehearsal to execute and spite to maintain when you've been outgunned, outmanned, and left for dead in a freezing industrial ruin on a continent we thought we'd already won. When did this appear? I asked. It didn't appear. Jorvan's voice was carefully neutral in the way that young analysts learn early, the way that means, I have been looking at this for an hour and I didn't want to be right. It was always there. The signatures were suppressed. They were, she stopped. Say it. They were using the thermal mass of the collapsed structure. Positioning bodies against heat-absorbing materials to mask individual signatures. The cluster read as ambient decay from the building. We were scanning for human-sized heat profiles. She paused. We weren't scanning for humans shaped like rubble. I wrote 0831 hours. 73. Alive. Deliberate concealment, minimum 6-hour duration, sub-freezing conditions, successful. I stared at what I'd written. Then, I wrote, they knew we were scanning. They planned for it. Veth did not take this well. I note this not with judgment, I did not take it well either, I simply had the advantage of having half expected it, which is different from being prepared for it, but because her response shaped the next 18 hours in ways that compounded the problem significantly. 73 is not a threat, she said. 73 organized, concealed, and operationally active soldiers in a position we believe neutralized is a containment problem. Not a front. She pulled up the broader map. We hold 12 key grid positions. We have air coverage on every transit corridor. They have no resupply. No support. No exit. She touched each point as she named it. The gesture of someone closing a case. We wait. They exhaust themselves. I wrote 0847 hours. Decision, passive containment. My notation, I do not think they exhaust the way we exhaust. I did not say this out loud. There are things you don't say to a sub-commander, and one of them is, I have been watching these creatures for 9 cycles and I do not think exhaustion functions in them the way it functions in us. What I had observed logged, timestamped, cross-referenced, was this: the worse the conditions got, the more the Vanguard units cohered. Not collapsed inward, not fragmented, not devolved into individual survival behavior. Cohered. Tightened. The units that had taken the most losses showed the highest performance metrics in subsequent engagements. The ones we'd separated from their command structure didn't scatter, they created lateral authority, field promoted each other, redistributed roles with a flexibility that our own command protocol would require a 3-day review board to approve. And there was the matter of the human I'd seen at 0200 hours. The limping one. I pulled the footage again. Watched the gait, the favored left leg, the weight shift compensation that indicated injury to the right knee or hip, the carry bag slung wrong because one arm wasn't fully operational. I watched the whistling, which I still couldn't identify but which the acoustic log noted as recurring melodic fragment, likely cultural/habitual, consistent production despite physical strain indicators. The human was singing. Not loudly. Not for morale performance. Just singing. To themselves. In a blown-out industrial sector at 0200 on a continent we controlled, carrying something that our analysts would later determine was a field-stripped atmospheric sensor with 3 components removed and rehoused in a configuration our engineering team spent 6 hours trying to reverse engineer. They had built something. From parts of things we'd broken. 1,340 hours. Grid 779er, changed. The formations had moved. This sounds simple. It was not simple. The formations had moved without triggering a single perimeter alert across 3 separate grid sectors, which meant either our perimeter alert system had a failure mode we hadn't documented, Jorvan checked, it didn't, or the Vanguard had identified the detection thresholds and moved in units small enough and slow enough and, apparently, cold enough to pass beneath them. They were cold because they wanted to be cold. Regulation of body temperature. Deliberate. Sustained. I sat with this for a moment. I thought about the specific, unpleasant mental exercise of choosing to be cold, of overriding whatever biological imperative says move, generate heat, survive immediately, in service of a tactical goal that would only pay off hours later. I thought about doing this in a collapsed building, in a formation, in coordination with 72 other people, without making a sound. I wrote, 1,347 hours. They moved 2 kilometers. Undetected. The human with the sensor component is now in grid 7A2. I drew a small arrow on my pad. Tracking. They are going somewhere specific. Then, I wrote the thing I'd been not writing for 6 hours, because it needed to be in the record even if Beth never read it. We told ourselves we'd won because the math said we'd won. 73 soldiers cannot hold a continent. 73 soldiers cannot break a blockade. 73 soldiers cannot reverse the material reality of this campaign. But 73 soldiers can move to a specific location for a specific purpose while we watch our passive containment protocols and wait for them to exhaust. And I don't know what the location is. And I don't know what the purpose is. And the human with the bad knee is still, as of 1,347 hours, whistling. The ration brick I hadn't finished at breakfast was still on my desk. I ate it cold. It tasted exactly the same. Here is what the sensor was for. I'll tell you now, because the review board has requested linear documentation, and because by the time I understood what the sensor was for, 3 things had already happened that I could not undo, which means the narrative value of suspense is, at this point, purely academic. The sensor was for our comms relay. Not to destroy it, they didn't have the material for that, and, even if they had, a destroyed relay is a problem with a solution. You replace it. You reroute. You file an incident report and spend 2 days in the kind of administrative purgatory that makes combat feel like a vacation. No. The sensor rebuilt, rehoused, reconfigured by someone with a bad knee and, apparently, an extremely specific set of skills, was designed to listen to the relay. To map its transmission cycling. To identify the 17-second window every 4.3 minutes during which our encryption handshake protocol left a narrow, almost theoretical gap in signal authentication. 17 seconds. Every 4 minutes and 18 seconds. The Vanguard had been inside our communications architecture for, by the time we detected it, approximately 11 hours. Not transmitting. Not injecting. Just listening. Building a picture of our grid deployment, our patrol rhythms, our resupply schedule, our personnel rotation, our contingency positions. Everything we thought we were hiding behind a blockade and a passive containment strategy. They'd been reading it like a document left on an open desk. 1900 hours, Jorvan brings me tea I didn't ask for. I log this. It means she's scared. How long until they use it? She asked. They're already using it. I pulled up the movement logs, cross-referenced against the comms intercept timeline. The pattern was there once you knew to look for it. Vanguard unit movements that tracked, with approximately 40-minute lag, the patrol shift changes our comms had broadcast. They were scheduling themselves around us. Not avoiding contact exactly, positioning for it. On their terms. Subcommander Veth needs to. Subcommander Veth, I said, and then I stopped, because there are things you don't say, and, finished with, is being briefed. Sit down, Jorvan. Drink something. She sat. She didn't drink anything. She was looking at the movement map with the expression of someone doing arithmetic they don't want to finish. Ref. She said it quietly. There are 73 of them. Yes. We have 412. Yes. So why does this map look like we're the ones being maneuvered? I said it so she didn't have to. Because we are. Veth arrived at 19:23 hours. I know this precisely because I was watching the door and I wrote it down the moment she walked in, because I had been preparing for this conversation for approximately 6 hours and I wanted the timestamp in the record. In 11 years of service, I have developed a finely calibrated sense for which conversations will later appear in review board inquiries, and this one had that quality, the specific atmospheric pressure of a room where a bad decision is about to become someone's documented legacy. I had decided, somewhere around 1,700 hours, and my third cup of the beverage our dispensary insists on calling stimulant broth despite it having no identifiable flavor profile and a color that exists nowhere in nature, that the bad decision would not be mine. The intercept is confirmed, she asked. Yes. They're reading our comms. Have been. 11 hours minimum. Her jaw did a thing. I noted it without description because the review board does not need to know what Sub-Commander Veth's jaw does when she has made a significant error and is in the process of deciding how to reframe it. Pull the encryption. She said it immediately, decisively, in the tone that gets things logged as command decisiveness rather than reactive error correction. New protocol. Force them back to blind. That will take 3 hours to implement fleet-wide. Then, start now. If we change the protocol, they'll know we detected them. She looked at me. They'll also know, I continued, keeping my voice in the register I use for things that must be in the record, that we spent 11 hours not detecting them. Which means they had 11 hours of our patrol data. Which means whatever they're planning, they planned it with 11 hours of accurate intelligence about our positions. The room was quiet. The flickering light on Deck 3 did its thing. What are they planning? Veth asked. I don't know. This was true. I had hypotheses. I had 6, logged at 1,712 hours with probability assessments that I was not confident in and had noted as such, but I didn't know, and the particular quality of not knowing felt important to name precisely, because there is a difference between we have assessed the threat and are managing it and we are watching something we don't yet understand and calling it contained, because the alternative is admitting we have already lost the initiative. We had lost the initiative. At some point in the last 11 hours, possibly earlier, possibly at the moment the human with the bad knee walked into a sector we weren't fully covering and started building something from broken parts, at some point, the 73 soldiers we declared incompatible with continued resistance had quietly taken the initiative back. 2047 hours. The thing I had not yet understood. The formations moved again. But, this time differently. Not a gradual thermal-managed drift through our detection threshold. Fast. All 3 clusters, simultaneous, in 3 directions that on the map look like dispersion, like breaking, like the kind of fragmentation that happens when units run out of cohesion and start making individual survival choices. Jorvan put it up on the main display and said, they're scattering. I looked at the map. I wrote, 2047 hours. 3-vector movement. Reads as fragmentation. Then, I stopped writing and I looked at the map for a long time, because there was something about the geometry that was doing a thing to the back of my mind, a thing like a word you almost remember, a thing like a sound your acoustic system flags as non-threatening when it should be flagging it as something else entirely. 3 vectors. Vector 1, toward our southern resupply depot. Vector 2, toward our primary communications relay tower, the physical tower, the hardware, not the signal. Vector 3, straight at nothing. A blown-out sector, nothing significant, no tactical value, 3 kilometers of ash and structural debris. And, then, I understood. Vector 3 was the singer. The limping soldier, the bad knee, the atmospheric sensor, the 11 hours of our comms data not going anywhere we'd assessed as valuable. Going to a position we'd already written off. Going to a location in the ash field where I pulled the topographic layer, where the terrain formed a natural elevation that our own engineers had noted in Cycle 3 as potential observation point, assessed non-viable for enemy use due to exposure. Non-viable for enemy use due to exposure. Which meant, visible. Which meant, from that position, you could see both the southern depot and the relay tower simultaneously. Vector 1 and Vector 2 weren't objectives. They were pressure. They were going to force us to respond, move units to defend the depot, move units to defend the tower, and, while we were responding, the singer with the bad knee was going to climb to an exposed observation point and watch exactly where we moved them from and what we left behind. They didn't need to take the depot. They didn't need to take the tower. They needed the map of what we did when we thought we were under attack. They needed to read us the same way we read terrain. I told Veth at 2051. She was quiet for long enough that the Deck 3 light completed 2 full flicker cycles. Can we intercept the third vector? She asked. Yes. But, then, we've reacted to all 3, and they have what they wanted regardless. Can we ignore all 3? The depot is genuinely vulnerable on Vector 1. If they reach it, so we have to respond. We have to respond. She was quiet again. I wrote, 2054 hours. We are going to respond. We are going to do exactly what 73 people engineered us to do, from a collapsed building, in sub-freezing temperatures, over 11 hours, using parts of equipment we destroyed. And, we are going to call it a command decision. I did not say this. I capped my pen. The Deck 3 light flickered. Pull 2 units from Grid 6, Veth said finally. Cover the depot. Maintain tower defense as is. Track the third vector but don't intercept, let them climb the hill. Once they're exposed, we have them. It was, objectively, the best available option within the framework of options we had. It was also exactly what they needed us to do. I know this now. I want the record to reflect that I knew it then, too, in the particular way you know a thing when you can see the shape of it but can't yet name all the parts. The singer needed us to pull Grid 6. I didn't know why yet. 2,310 hours. A different kind of quiet. The southern team moved. I logged their route, their timing, the 2-unit gap they left in Grid 6 when they pulled out. The observation team reached the hill at 2244. We had eyes on them. 1 sensor operator confirmed 3 individuals, moving slowly, 1 with an irregular gait. They set up a position. They began, our systems confirmed, running atmospheric scans. Watching us. I watched them watching us and I thought about 11 years of service and the specific ration brick flavor of small victories, and I thought about the word incompatible, and I wrote, 2,310 hours. Grid 6 is open. Third unit of Vanguard Cluster 2, 11 soldiers, is moving through the gap we just created. Direction, unknown. Purpose, unknown. Then, I wrote, this was the point. Then, I wrote, Grid 6 leads to the communications backbone. The physical backbone. Not the relay. The buried junction that the relay runs through. The one that, if disrupted, does not take 3 hours to re-encrypt. The one that takes 4 days to physically repair. I stared at it. The sensor wasn't the intelligence asset. The sensor got us to move. The comms intercept wasn't the attack vector. It got us to pull Grid 6. The attack vector is 11 soldiers in a maintenance corridor we just undefended. The singer with the bad knee is the decoy. We spent 11 hours watching the decoy. I was already moving when I wrote the last line. I have logged this precisely because the review board will want to know the sequence, and the sequence is, I understood it at 2314, I was in the corridor at 2315, I was shouting at a very alarmed junior officer to get units back to Grid 6 at 2315 and 40 seconds, and we reached the junction at, I want to describe this accurately, because accuracy is the only honest currency I have left in this accounting, and I have been sloppy in places imprecise, or slow, or too confident in my own assessments, and the record should reflect what I saw, not what I prepared to see. I had expected sabotage. Clean, deliberate, focused. Find the junction box, expose the conduit, destroy it. 4 days of comms darkness across our grid. Clean tactical logic, clean execution. What I found was 11 people in a maintenance corridor who were not destroying anything. They were working. The lights were, they'd found the emergency phosphor strips that infrastructure teams use in maintenance crawlways, the kind that require manual activation, and put out about 40% of functional illumination, and they had them strung at intervals in the corridor, and, in that orange-gray light 11 humans were doing things I could not immediately categorize. Panels open. Equipment laid out in a pattern that looked almost surgical, which is a comparison I reach for because the organization of it, the intentionality, felt like the preparation you do before something precise and irreversible. They knew we were coming. They didn't run. 3 of them kept working. The others turned, and there was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, that I have gone back to in the log many times since, trying to write it right, and I keep deleting what I write because the language I have is not built for it. They were not afraid. That is not quite it. Fear is a state I can document. I have logged it in my own physiology enough times to recognize the markers. They were focused. They were focused in the way you focus on a thing you've committed to finishing, and the arrival of people who might stop you is a variable you've already calculated and absorbed, and what's left is just the work. One of them, toward the back, kneeling by the main junction access, was the singer. I could see the bad knee in the way they were kneeling, favoring it to the left, and they were doing something to the junction with both hands, and they were still humming. I don't know if they knew they were doing it. 2,321 hours. The encounter. I will not reconstruct the tactical exchange in this segment. It is documented separately in the incident report filed by Tactical Officer Pren, who was ahead of me and who handles these things with the kind of formal brevity that makes review boards comfortable. What I will document is this: we were 11 versus 11 and we had the corridor advantage and we had reinforcements behind us and we knew all of that and so did they. And, still, 3 of them kept working. That is the thing. That is the thing I keep coming back to. With 11 of us in the corridor and the math clearly legible, 3 of the Vanguard kept their hands on the junction and kept working, and the other 8 positioned to give them as long as possible to finish, and I need the record to reflect that this was not a suicide posture, not we are going to die for this. It was more functional than that. It was, we have calculated how long we need and this is how we buy it. They bought 4 minutes. It was enough. I learned what they'd done to the junction 3 days later, when our technical team finally finished their assessment and sent me the report with a note at the bottom that read, in the careful phrasing of engineers who are furious but must remain professional, we have not previously encountered this configuration. We are still determining its full scope. They hadn't destroyed the junction. They'd patched it. Specifically, they had integrated the rehoused sensor components, the ones the singer had carried out of the northern sector before dawn, in a bag, with a bad knee, while whistling, into our physical comms backbone in a way that created a passive relay. A listener. Not our listener. They had built a nerve ending into our nervous system. Everything our backbone carried, from that point forward, would also reach a receiver somewhere in the industrial sector. Narrow band. Intermittent. Survivable on salvage power 4, the engineering team assessed, approximately 60 days. 60 days. They hadn't needed to break our comms. They'd needed to keep them. They needed our comms to keep running, reliably, so they could keep reading them. Cycle 10, 0600 hours. The debrief that felt like an autopsy. Veth did not say anything for a long time after I finished. The room had the quality of air that has been breathed too many times, the specific staleness of a space where people have been working through the night on a problem that keeps reshaping itself. The ration brick from yesterday was still on my desk. I didn't touch it. Some stubborn instinct had decided it was a marker now, a fixed point. The brick I hadn't finished when I first learned there were 73. There were still 41. This number had come in at 0400 and I had written it down and not slept and I was still not certain what to do with it. 41 was not a victory for us. 41 was not a defeat for them. 41 was a number that, in context, meant, after everything, there are still 41, and 41 of them now had 60 days of our communications routed through a piece of equipment we couldn't easily find or disable without taking down our own backbone. What do they want? Veth said finally. It wasn't a strategic question. I understood that. It was the question you ask when you've been playing a game by rules you understood and someone has turned out to be playing a different game entirely, and the new game is still going on, and you've only just worked out the board. What do they want? I thought about it honestly, which is harder than it sounds when you're tired and irritated and professionally embarrassed. They wanted to survive. Obviously. But that wasn't the full shape of it. They wanted, and I wrote this in the log and I stand by it, they wanted to remain legible. To keep knowing. To maintain, in the absence of every material advantage, the one thing that could not be bombed or blocked or contained, an understanding of what was being done to them and what we were going to do next. They weren't fighting for territory. They weren't fighting for the calm's backbone. They were fighting for the ability to keep thinking. And 41 of them, in a broken industrial sector, with salvage parts and bad knees and intermittent phosphor lighting, had against every assessment of incompatibility won that particular fight. 0800 hours. What I told the review board. I filed a complete log. I annotated it where I was wrong, most of it, as I have said, and I submitted it without edits because my record has always been accurate and I am not starting with falsity now, not at this point in a career, not over this. The review board asked me to assess, was the Vanguard's continued resistance a significant ongoing threat? I wrote, yes. But, not for the reasons the question assumes. The board asked me to assess, what is required to neutralize the threat? I wrote, I don't know. I am not sure neutralize is the right frame. You cannot neutralize a thinking thing by managing its resources. You can only do it by making it stop thinking, and I have watched these soldiers think in sub-freezing temperatures with no food and no resupply and no comms and a compromised infrastructure for 9 cycles, and I do not know what would make them stop. The board did not enjoy this answer. I noted their reaction, 0814 hours, mixed, trending negative, and did not amend the record. Final entry, Cycle 10, 1200 hours. I have eaten the ration brick. It was worse cold. I note this for completeness. The receiver in the industrial sector is still broadcasting, as of this log. We know it's there. We haven't been able to take it down without compromising our own backbone, which means we're in the position of being tapped and, knowing we're being tapped and, having to decide, every hour, what we say into our own systems. We are, in other words, thinking about what they think. Which means they're inside our decision-making loop. Which means, 41 soldiers with no resupply, in a collapsed building, are shaping the operational thinking of a command structure that outnumbers them nearly tenfold. I wrote this down and looked at it for a while. Then, I wrote, I have been trying to find the word for what they are doing, the right frame, the right category. I don't think we have one. I think we built our strategy on the assumption that a broken force stays broken, and these soldiers seem to be operating on a different assumption entirely, one that I have logged across 12 days of observation and still cannot fully name. The closest I can get is this: they treat loss as information. Every time we take something from them, supply lines, positions, comms, numbers, they use the shape of what was taken to understand something new about us. We have been, without meaning to, teaching them. I don't know what the lesson is. I think they're still figuring that out. I think we should be paying much closer attention to when they do.